Our first speaker is Kevin Nordker. He's co-founder and CEO of Ampair, an aerospace startup based in Los Angeles that's accelerating the world's transition to sustainable aviation. Ampair was founded in early 2016 and is quickly approaching their first full-scale flight demonstration scheduled for later this year. I'm sure you'll hear more about that. Kevin graduated with honors from Caltech, where he now sits on the board of directors for the Alumni Association. Prior to founding Ampair, Kevin spent 7 years at Northrop Grumman in aerospace R&D and program management, developing and fielding advanced aircraft and satellite technologies. He has a proven track record for initiating and delivering innovative technical solutions, building and motivating teams, and optimizing systems. At Ampair, Kevin combines his technical and leadership skills with his entrepreneurial vision, love for the outdoors, and passion for things that fly. His presentation is Accelerating the World's Transition to Sustainable Aviation. Please welcome Kevin.
Well, good morning, everybody. We want to thank the Cafe Foundation for inviting us to be here today. It's truly an honor to be around some of the greatest thinkers and doers in the industry, the people who have been taking part in the long tail leading up to where we are today, and certainly a group which is coming together to take us into the next decades of electric aviation. So I'm Kevin Nordker, co-founder and CEO of Ampair. We founded Ampair with a simple but big question of what were the highest performance aircraft uniquely enabled by electric vehicle technologies. So started with ambitions for supersonic and vertical takeoff and landing, but have really taken a practical approach to how are we going to arrive at meaningful products. And so rather than pushing hype and talking just about vision today, I'd really like to walk you through how we are approaching in our methodologies for approaching how to accelerate this transition to sustainable air travel and how we've gone about finding that path as a company and how I would suggest we go about this together as an industry. So I'll cover a few topics. I'll start by just at a high level looking at the dynamic industry in which we are all taking these activities. I'll suggest a few guiding principles, at least what I feel is important and how we've set the principles for our company and our development. Looking at technology opportunities, market dynamics, and the certification pathway and how we approach those. Putting that into practice as a company and what that looks like as a timeline for us. And then bringing it all together as an industry, again, looking at how together we can achieve all of these big dreams. So the dynamic environment that we're in. So right, with great opportunity in here comes great uncertainty. That is the opportunity we have is to upset a relatively stagnant industry by massive changes in technology, market, and certification which are enabling. Now with technology, there's storage, energy storage, of course, propulsion, and then airframe integrations, all which are dynamic, all which we need to understand the context we're working in, and then the future of where those new technologies will come in, as well as timelines, setting realistic expectations with what's achievable with the technologies. With the market, it's absolutely critical for us to consider not just what we will fly, but who will fly it and why will they care. What is the return on investment for our customers, for our companies, and for our investors? What is the air traffic or the air system integration and the repercussions of bringing these technologies into those markets, as well as what will public perception be, and how is that a shared challenge and opportunity for us as a community? And then finally, looking at certification. Of course, we've got the dynamic regulations and standards that are being brought to bear, but then also considering and taking a realistic look at what the timelines and costs to bringing these opportunities to market will be. So in order to address these, as a company, Ampair, we've set some guiding principles for each of these categories. For technology, at the core of our approach is to baseline existing technologies wherever possible and to learn everything we can at each step along the way from those technologies. Keep the system as simple as possible, driving design decisions from true requirements of the system. There are a lot of nice to haves on vehicles, but keeping it simple early, learning, and then being able to bring further features at a later point in time is essential to ultimately arriving at the right solution. And then planning upfront for iteration. I'll talk a little bit more about this in detail later on, but imagine something like battery packs compared, the life cycle of a battery pack compared to the life cycle of an airframe are order of magnitude different. How do you plan upfront from that from a technology standpoint, and of course a little later on from the certification standpoint. In choosing a market, there are significant opportunities. There are many different niches that will end up using electric aviation. We've got the trainer market, the VTOL market. You've got regional commercial and potentially even longer range aircraft. Again, the key here for us is to identify markets that exist today, that have customers that we can talk to, that have areas where we can pilot and get that iterative feedback into our design loops. To keep it simple, to be able to perform those operations rather than just dream of what will be possible 10 years from now. And then to watch for areas of growth as we have the changes in public perception or air traffic integration. There may be emerging markets which, while today are not viable, will emerge as the areas for deploying this technology in the future. And then again, with regulations, if we can keep our system simple, it will improve our ability to actually bring meaningful products to market. Work within existing regulations, work with regulators early on. Yesterday, we heard how the FAA, and this is, Tom was speaking about how data drives these decisions. Bring that in, work with them, and stay realistic. In the industry, there is a lot of hype. It's beneficial in some ways, but it's also a little scary. Some companies are presenting performance characteristics that are not achievable, and many times those companies know it just as they say it. And I think we need to watch out from whether it's the public perception or the regulatory side and make sure that we're always having a realistic view on this approach. So all of these principles tie into the kind of foundation of our guiding principles, which is a lean, iterative approach. Many of you are probably familiar with this, but this is a very data-centric approach where you look at learning about the systems in which you're working in as you grow. So you take the ideas, you build them up, you produce a product that then can be measured in a meaningful way. It doesn't have to be the final product. Maybe it doesn't pass on the battery energy density. Maybe it doesn't meet all of the customer requirements, but it answers essential questions by providing that data. The answers to those questions then enable you to learn about the next iteration and then push through the cycle again and again. And so I'll talk a bit through those same three categories: technology, market, and certification, and give you a little bit more specific view on at Ampere how we are addressing these. So the baseline for building this future of technology is looking at what is available today. From that, you can do the gap assessment of what will we need tomorrow. So this is both where can we fly, what is achievable in a realistic sense, but then it also highlights those gaps for what needs to be developed today, or even potentially what should not be developed today. Change is a great thing, but for example, when you integrate battery packs integral to a structure, which might give you your best weight efficiency today, those battery packs will ultimately be obsolete by the time certification is around for that aircraft. Or similarly, if the technology which you're baselining is unable to meet the future needs of your customers, and yet you've got a certification path that makes it so you're unable to incrementally certify components of your system because you've locked it all into one TC. These are areas of that you really need to be approaching it with a clear mind. So how do you bring compelling solutions today with technology that exists? It looks like a little bit of a formatting issue here. So in what we're looking at are storage technologies, and rather than dive into the details, there are experts in each of these areas. Storage technologies today are between, let's say, 150 and 200 watt-hours per kilogram at a pack level. Of course, there are cell manufacturers who have data on cells upwards of 400 watt-hours per kilogram, but there are questions on the safety and reproducibility of those cells. From a propulsion side, the motors which you can easily access today are in the 3 to maybe 5 kilowatts per kilogram range, which is good enough for most applications. But now considering also what is the efficiency of those motors and where do we need to move in the efficiency, which ultimately gives you longer range flights. And then integration components, looking at specifics on your thermal systems and airframe designs. So rather than take these and try to design a point design new aircraft that will be type certified in the future, we've decided to go through a more iterative process, taking these technologies and having output along these loops of answers to meaningful questions, like validating the system architecture at a most basic level, retrofit flights, which some people in the audience have deep experience with, and looking at how you can use those retrofit flights to prove out technologies, but also address certification questions and prove out your market viability, getting your product into the hands of customers as early as possible. And then even in these configurations, while with existing technologies that may not be the most compelling long-term, let's say you're limited in range, it does meet the needs of niche applications. And so as a company, we're very focused on those niche early adopters. So the path for us looks like architecting out powertrains, retrofitting them into existing vehicles, doing those flight demonstrations internally, bringing those retrofits into the hands of our customers in pilot projects, taking that and delivering those into other vehicles, whether single or twin engine turboprops. And ultimately, all this does lead to the longer term vision, which is those higher performance aircraft. So how do you decide which market to address? There are many, as I highlighted earlier, many solutions here, right? There's not one appropriate market. One of the great benefits of this, this fundamental shift in technology is that it's opening up quite a bit. But answering these questions has been critical for us to decide where to put our energies. So asking who will fly electric aircraft? Why will they be flying these planes? And where will they be flying these planes? All of these end up causing you to focus in on one niche or another, but continually questioning these with data and actual measurements in customer hands with a very customer-centric focus, we believe is critical. So considerations, should you fly regional, vertical takeoff and landing, high speed? Should you consider long range? What's their cost tolerance, either from an upfront purchase price or operating price? All very important questions to address along the way, and I'll actually dive into a few of these specifically. So as a company, we focused on regional thin haul travel. Right now, this area has significant challenges. These challenges are generally driven by operating cost and have driven a significant reduction in the number of daily flights in this market. If you just look at some data that's now pretty well known across the industry of about 5,000 airports around the United States, which are commercially viable, only about 10% of those are used today. And while those airports could be used and are more local to communities, they're not being used because of the significant operating cost, either fuel price or maintenance. You just can't make it close as an airline. And what happens is that you end up disconnecting these communities, not for a lack of demand, but for just a lack of viability, disconnecting them from the regional air traffic system. And so this is what the opportunity we see is to take electric and address these markets by really driving to a viable operation, a viable fleet operation for these airlines. So electrification allows these routes to be profitable. We're able to, by serving these regional markets and these smaller airports, we're able to reduce those next to last mile time, the distance that people have to travel, especially at either end of their flights, and then the ultimate cost of these operations. And critical to us is the fact that we can fit into existing air traffic management systems with existing operators where we can get that feedback on the system early and often to inform future iterations. So while we all have, well, I assume many of us care about the environment, ultimately the reason people are adopting aircraft is less for the emissions and pollution reduction and more because of the economics. And what we see specifically in our approach is that we need to prioritize the economic argument over just about every other argument here for why electrification makes sense. Mike actually gave a few examples yesterday about why do people care about electrification. And my answer to that, at least for the regional market, is absolutely operating cost. Depending on where you are in the United States, you can have between a 75 and 90% reduction in your direct operating cost. But as I spoke about earlier, we need to be realistic about where those costs actually are. Don't forget about battery pack replacements. Look at the life cycle cost of these vehicles, the replacement costs of those batteries, which is actually kind of a complex rat's nest of trades that end up having to go on to find really where you can drive a viable, realistic, positive outcome for your customers. So in here, reducing the major overhauls doesn't give you a complete elimination of those costs because you do have to replace those battery packs periodically through the flight. While this is a 25% operation cost savings for an airline, and that's at an aggregated entire company cost for their operations, it looks like a 3 to 5 times multiplier on their profitability or on their profit margins. And so this is validated with actual operator data, looking at the costs that they're actually paying on the bases for fuel and looking at the operations of their vehicles. So a very compelling argument for them. But where will they be able to fly? So one of the risks that we have, and one of the first things that gets brought up, is electric aircraft won't be able to fly incredibly far. Your range limited. What happens with range anxiety? Especially in a retrofit configuration, you're really not going to make it as far as if you have an optimized vehicle. But what we see, even with conservative estimates for battery technology, energy density improvement, within about 5 years, we'll be able to serve over 50% of the flights that are actually flown with these vehicles. And that includes the reserves that are required after the useful range of those flights. By optimizing new aircraft, of course, you can go much further. But again, with the iterative approach that we're taking, we're trying to serve the most critical needs today and get these in customer hands as soon as possible. So considering the certification pathway, the key is that our approach is to establish the trust in the market that's with end users and with regulators before trying to go for moonshots. There are a lot of moonshot companies out there where their first product is going to be a new aircraft. That looks like, to me, missed opportunity for learning, for engaging with customers, for engaging with regulators, and engaging with the rest of the industry along the way. That it's absolutely imperative for us to come together, go through these step-by-step processes together in order to really have compelling solutions of the future. So for Ampere, we're certifying propulsion systems through retrofit of practical, marketable aircraft that are in operation today. We're working with existing operators to prove the value proposition for them, to actually demonstrate, not just in a pie chart with a slice popped out saying 25%, but actually measured operating data. Because if we made a mistake in our assessments, we will learn that through experimentation and validation. And then finally, waiting on developing, fully vetting the clean sheet designs until we have propulsion systems that we can actually trust. And once you have those systems, once you've gone through the processes, you can actually develop a new aircraft design which is more likely to succeed and might even make it through the certification process faster and with less expense. So putting it into practice as a company, in 2016, we founded the company and immediately went into cycles on technology and market assessment, doing technology studies on what aircraft might be viable, what markets could use them, talking with potential customers, and looping actually quite a few times to find how viable each segment within the market is. 2017, we focused on our value proposition. We received 8 letters of interest from airlines, regional airlines, who want to integrate electric aircraft into their fleets. We then, from the value proposition, we validated that from a modeling perspective, a system modeling perspective, we determined what was a truly viable technical product, and then did breadboard proofs of concept of those components. In 2018, we're focused on system-level proof of concept. As Yolanda mentioned, we'll be flying our first full-size demonstrator later this year, which is a retrofit of a twin-engine plane. What we've also focused on now is looking external to our company, to OEMs and other players in the industry, to aggregate best practices, best technologies, and bright minds across the industry to try to achieve these goals. I think one of the errors which we see in the overhyped segments of the market is that people are trying to be vertically integrated all the way through. They're trying to stay closed. And I think that, again, as an industry, that puts us at risk. In 2019, we'll be pushing our product over into our end user hands. Now, that'll be pre-certification, but we will be able to actually have demonstration projects where we're working with the operators, where we're gathering data, again, leading toward the proof of that value proposition by those operations in 2020. Of course, we're always driving towards certification of the system. At this level, right now we're looking at the architecture level, making sure we've got all the right decisions. We anticipate changes in the component level technologies, whether that's the motors, the batteries, or other subsystems along the way, which will ultimately get pinned down in that time frame. And then from 2020 onward, looking at performance improvements. Again, no part of this was starting a new TC on an aircraft. We're really looking at learning from what we've done with these propulsion systems, with the OEMs we've worked with, and then driving toward those improvements thereafter. But we do have our eye on the future. And we have a vision for what is potentially possible given electrification. The Tailwind aircraft incorporates the most advanced technologies from aerospace, electric vehicle, and autonomy, creating smooth, quiet, and clean ride for the regional air traffic market. And this may one day become a reality. And maybe supersonic will as well. We'll have to see if that actually comes to fruition. But no company is going to get there on their own, and we're all going to have to do this together. And so what I suggest is that we all continue to participate in activities like this, the CAFE Foundation. AmpAir is a proud supporter of this organization. We think that these conversations, as I've said, are critical to the shared success of our industry. We have opportunities and risks that, regardless of who achieves them or who realizes those risks, might impact all of us. It's in these organizations and these conversations that we're able to move forward as an industry and realize our shared dreams. So with that, come fly with us, and thank you.